So we are delighted to have a program that coincides with a movie that has been playing at the theaters in recent months and has been extremely well received across the United States. Our speaker today, I first met Rickey in 2007 when he was in the process of helping to bring baseball, AAA baseball, to Reno, Nevada, where I was serving as the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Branch and the Pacific Coast League at that point in time were based in Colorado Springs, and they relocated to Round Rock in 2010. Since then, the PCL has become an active member of the Round Rock Chamber of Commerce, and we're very pleased that Matt Lundgren and Melanie Fiore of the Chamber staff, of the PCL staff, are here today. Also, Dwight Hall has been plugged in to our activities as well. And our keynote sponsor for this afternoon is the Round Rock Express. And introducing Branch will be George King, the Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Express. George also moved to Round Rock in 2010. He oversees all the day-to-day operations. He works very closely with the Express President Dave Fendrick, who's here with us today, and represents the Express on the PCL Board of Directors. Just some of George's many duties: he handles relations with the Texas Rangers, with visiting teams, with league officials, and many of the other details that go into a successful AAA baseball operation. So with that in mind, please join me in welcoming George King of the Round Rock Express.
Thanks very much. Is this right? There we go. First of all, how many folks have been to the Express or Del Diamond this year? It's not everybody. Come on. Find those people next to you and make sure they make it out. Obviously, we had some changes this year, most notably our big video board, so people like me can see what's going on during the game. But it's been a big success, and our club is currently 2 games in first place in their division. So as we enter into the second half of the season, our home schedule, be sure to come out and root for your Express and bring a group. And we've got plenty of folks here sitting at the bar table, and Dave's in the back. If you have any interest in bringing a group out and coming to see us, please let us know, and we'll be happy to take care of you. I'm going to take a little bit of credit for the PCL office coming here and moving here from Colorado Springs. I was the, I guess, the advanced party, because when the Express became AAA, they joined the Pacific Coast League, and being a native Texan, I saw it as an opportunity, and I was given the opportunity to relocate wherever I wanted to in the league with my family, and of course took that chance and answered the question in about 5 seconds to move to Round Rock. And I came over in, I think, 2006 and spent 3 or 4 years here before I went to Nashville and came back in 2010. But I'm going to take credit for Branch being here. Branch is obviously part of a legacy, a family name that's recognizable. You've heard a couple of folks refer to it today, but I'm going to take you back a little bit, and Branch's, I guess, theme will be a little bit historic, obviously, and progressive. But baseball, like the rest of America in 1945, was segregated. We were recovering from World War II, and we were trying to get back to normal. Baseball was trying to get back to normal, but normal for our society was very different for various corners of our culture. And there were some wrongs, quite frankly. And Branch's grandfather had witnessed that wrong throughout his life and wanted to do something about it. There was a private meeting held between 2 unlikely individuals, a 26-year-old black athlete and an aging 60-something-year-old white baseball executive.
Let's be careful about that aging.
So in some ways, one would represent the past, of America, and one would represent the future. And this was the crossroads, really, for our culture. And when they walked out of that 3-hour meeting, and there's different descriptions for it, I'm sure Branch will get into the details. Those 2 gentlemen, to me, that was one of the biggest moments, unheralded moments in our culture, because those 2 individuals had their own duties and responsibilities to what they represented in our country, walking out of that meeting. And they had both agreed to terms that would mean criticism, even life threats, but also change, and that's what it took. And it kicked off, and maybe there were obviously other little checkpoints before them, but this was the kickoff of the movement for civil rights in our country, and perhaps you could extend that beyond the borders of the United States. But we're lucky and blessed today to have a speaker who is a lifelong witness to the argument that was created that day, and obviously closely tied to one of the antagonists of the meeting. Former boss of mine, 10 years we worked together. He's a mentor, he's a friend, he's an extended family member. If you ask my wife, he's very much part of our family. He's a man of uncommon intellect and humor. We went through a lot of ups and downs. We had our own challenges and dramas with team owners and umpires and players and cities and city managers, no offense, Steve. Mayors, no offense, Mayor. But we always did it, I think, with a pithy sense of humor. And there was irony upon irony. We had one common motto, and that was, out of bizarre, strange, and difficult challenges, sometimes come bizarre, strange, and interesting results, and usually for the good. And Branch wears that, I think, that mantra very well for our league on behalf of the game and what the game stands for. And if you read the rules and the tenets of the game, it's something I know that's at the core of his beliefs, mine as well, and the folks that spend their life supporting the game that we work in. But I want you to take this opportunity today, and I'm glad you had the chance to take a glimpse at the legacy that I was exposed to and Melanie was exposed to for over a decade now, a legacy of that civil rights moment, that key moment in our history and our culture. And let's give a big Round Rock, Texas welcome to Branch Rickey.
I may be upstaged by the introduction. I'm not sure I can measure up to that, but I do want to thank Doug Kirkle, most especially for making this opportunity available to me, or inviting me to be part of combining the recognition of 42 with the chance to put that in front of you today. And I want to thank Bill and Synergy for your sponsorship, and the Round Rock Express for sponsoring this luncheon. As someone who arrived in this city, bringing my home and the league office just as recently as the fall of 2010, I have to say that I've felt anything but a newcomer as I've come here. Some of you have long histories, having childhoods of growing up here. Some of you have been born here. But others of you probably are in my tradition of coming here later. I can tell you of where I've lived, I have not encountered any other place that has been more conspicuous for that spirit of welcoming. It is just, it's just a marvelous, marvelous thing. It radiates, and I can go on about it, but I better get on with my task of giving you some insight as to what I know about the background of this movie 42. Let me simply summarize that I know George is taking wonderful credit for my being here, for the office being here, and it's true, it's true. And I have another example of that. I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner. I certainly wish that, and if my wife were here today, she would underscore that in spades, that same conviction. This year has been really a marvelous, a very, very special year, almost sort of a victory, prompted by this movie coming out. Not in the sense of hitting the lottery. I'm not financially involved in any respect, but very much for seeing a dream come true. A dream that has been part of, I think, in the background of the minds of so many of my family members. The second generation of the Rickey family has all passed away now, but we have about 18 cousins, and I was in contact with those 18 cousins as this movie approached, and they kept saying, wait, you better add our kids onto your mailing list, keep them up to date. I've now got that email mailing list. When I hit the Rickey family button, I now am sending to just over 70. So in the hearts and minds of so many, there was a desire to see this story told on the large screen, and in a first-class tradition. There have been stories on TV about it. There have been movies put out. One of the very worst, I'm embarrassed to admit, 1952, I think, starred Jackie Robinson in the role of Jackie Robinson. Probably did more to discredit the whole history and story of it, because Jackie was everything wonderful and magnificent as an athlete. The one thing he was not was a Hollywood movie actor. And so any of you who have seen that and been inclined to hold up on wanting to go to this movie, don't be led astray by what that was. This is not a it's not a what do you call those kinds of movies that are long and epic, like Doctor Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. What is the word I'm looking for? It's not an epic. It is more of a short little glimpse, and it's a very personal movie. How many of you have, since George took the liberty and asked how many have been out to the Express games, how many have seen the movie 42? Okay. And how many are now planning to go to it for sure? Because, all right, because of the intrigue. All right, well, I'm speaking to sort of a composite audience, and there will be those of you who know what I'm talking about from having seen the movie, and others I'll try to keep in the loop. Understand, my perspective is shaped by having lived my entire life practically around and inside the game of baseball, much unlike Reese and Reed Ryan, who, because of their father, had experienced that very same thing. Like them, my dream as a teenager was to play in the major leagues, as my grandfather had. Only one thing stood in my way. One thing spoiled my plans, I'm sorry to say, and that was the lack of any physical ability whatsoever. I can laugh about that now, but there were some years that was hard to laugh about when I was younger. And wonderfully, I've been able to live my dreams through being a fan, through my family before I got into the game, and then for now these many years that I've been able to live my dream by working in the game. So I come to the movie 42 from that background. It's a clever movie title. When I was wondering what they were going to title the movie, and I had all sorts of recommendations I could have given to them. And when I saw that title, I thought, oh, wow, that's going to leave a lot of people cold. But there's some intrigue to it. And, of course, there's great significance to it. There might be some in this audience, especially those of you who haven't seen the movie, who don't quite pick up on what 42 is. I don't want to call on anybody in particular, but of those of you who haven't seen the movie and haven't studied baseball history, do you have any idea what 42 really is? What is 42?
Number.
Number. Uniform number. Of?
Jackie Robinson.
Jackie Robinson. And probably many of you in this audience know that that number's been retired. Which is, nowadays, with the movability of athletes around sport, a lot of athletes think that one of the greatest recognitions you get out of sport is to have your number retired. more so than the Hall of Fame in the minds of some, I think. I mentioned Nolan already. There's only one athlete in the history of our sport who's had his number retired by 3 different teams. And it is Nolan Ryan, our Nolan Ryan. And the 3 teams are George, you don't get a guess. Dave, you can guess. If yes, the Astros and the Rangers and the Angels. That's Hall of Fame level, to have your name retired by 3 different organizations, and it's beyond every other Hall of Famer. Beyond every other Hall of Famer. Well, the movie 42 tells us something about why Jackie Robinson's number is retired. And to put it in perspective for you, it's not just by the Dodgers. You know that Jackie Robinson played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and then later when the Brooklyn club moved to Los Angeles, played for the Los Angeles Dodgers. So that's one and the same team. He doesn't get credit for 2 teams. He was retired by the Dodgers. But sometime not too long later, the commissioner decreed that Jackie's number would be retired not just for the one club, but it would be retired for all Major League clubs. When a number is retired, it means, what about that number? Can't wear it. It's not allowed to be worn unless some special exception is given, and 1 or 2 have happened throughout history. His number was retired for all clubs, meaning not any athlete on any single Major League club is allowed to wear 42. With one slight exception, there's one exception granted. And he not only decided to decree that for Major League Baseball, but decided to decree that for all of minor league baseball. So there's no 42 on any uniform number out of respect and regard for Jackie Robinson, and in fact, every stadium in Major League and minor league baseball has a 42 posted on their outfield wall. Well, the movie somewhat tells you why. It adds the dimensions of 2 more Hall of Famers into the equation. One of those was the shortstop on the team, teammate Pee Wee Reese, and the other was their boss, my grandfather, portrayed by Harrison Ford. And I can tell you, in my now 22-year marriage, this year has been particularly prominent in my marriage for the ability to have introduced my wife to Harrison Ford and gotten a picture taken of that. One from which I quickly stepped aside. You'll appreciate that. I thought she'd never come down from that cloud. She did very soon thereafter when she asked me, honey, where's the photo? And we're still working on that. We've got to get that photo. But I want to take just a few minutes to tell you a few things I know about these 3 men, Jackie and Pee Wee and my grandfather. Some of you here understand what it is to have to work harder than others. I think many of us feel that challenge, that we have to work harder than others to overcome what others can do with less effort. Jackie was a gifted athlete. He could do about everything he ever tried. In college, he was able to excel in 4 sports: football, baseball, basketball, and track. He set state records in the long jump and was All-American in football, a star in baseball. And he hoped to play professionally. But what we know, what Jackie's problem was, a little different from that of my own. What Jackie's problem was his skin color. Jackie was All-American, but he was African-American. And Major League Baseball, 1945, didn't allow anyone who was a Negro to play in the major leagues, no matter how good they were. So Jackie, after college and a stint in the U.S. Army, went to play in the Negro Leagues, a whole set of leagues played by Negro Americans. And separate, completely distinct from the other white leagues. In fact, there were laws in Florida. Brooklyn, when Jackie did sign, did not train in Florida, went to Havana, Cuba to train for spring training. This is a digression here very quickly from where I mean to be going. But Brooklyn couldn't train in Florida, and the problem that they had training in Florida was Florida had state laws. They call them Jim Crow laws. If a black athlete and a white athlete were on the same field, the police could go out and arrest who? The white athlete. Imagine that. They could go out and arrest the white athlete, which stopped all interracial competition on the field. So Jackie went and played in the Negro Leagues, and he joined the Kansas City Monarchs. The pay in the Negro Leagues was so small, and to give you an appreciation of the kind of tentativeness character of that, there was almost not an athlete in the league that had a contract. Satchel Paige had a contract, and there were a few contracts among some of the great players, but almost every other player didn't even have a contract. And instead of hanging his head and complaining about what he wasn't able to do, he just was bearing down, working on his skill. He was a first-year player, and he wasn't even one of the premier players in the league. And in retrospect, a lot of the Negro League players have said, why wasn't it me? I was a better athlete, I was a better baseball player than Jackie. I had proven it. I had hit such and such, or I had pitched such and such. So you have to imagine that background to the historic event. And I was curious to hear George introduce it and say it this way. But there are people that believe it was one of the greatest sporting events in the history of the 20th century that didn't take place on the field, on the court, in a boxing ring, or in competition. It took place in the office of the Brooklyn Dodgers. He came to New York City, invited by the general manager of the club, an aging George. You and I need to have a little bit more mentoring thing. This attaching aging to the 60s is not quite appropriate. It's okay for you to refer to my grandfather's aging at that point, but just any old 60 or anyway, we will get back to the topic. He was right. We did attach a lot of fun to our work. I'm a 25-year-old African American who had no pedigree insofar as being established in sport. An interface between two men so dissimilar. Imagine that young 25-year-old now sitting down thinking that stories he had heard, rumors he had heard through the grapevine, that this fella that's running the Brooklyn Dodgers was going to form a new Negro League team, enter it in the Negro Leagues, called Brooklyn Brown Dodgers. Very plausible. It was a fictional story my grandfather had very much perpetrated to allow his scouts to go around and scout dark-skinned ball players, African-American ball players, so that they could be scouting those players without tipping the hand of what the Brooklyn Dodgers might be doing. And within a very short period of time, in a grueling 3-hour meeting, it is true, grueling because my grandfather, not sure what he was getting. He knew a lot of things. He had done his homework on Jackie Robinson. He knew a lot about what he was getting into, he thought, but he wanted to make sure, and he confronted him. He went through instance after instance of scenarios that might be played out on the field, and challenged Jay time and again. And probably in the single most dramatic moment, and I didn't even make plans to talk about this, but in the single most dramatic moment, he had perspired through his business suit, taken off his jacket and put it aside, and was sweating through his shirt. And he got right up in Jackie's face after giving him an example of a confrontation that he was portraying, and he said, and what would you do then? And I think this is the best example, the greatest example of Jackie's genius. Jackie's given credit for so many things in retrospect, for his tireless determination, for just every competitive instinct and spirit you want to have. You don't hear many people talk about Jackie's intellect. And I think that is wrong because of this one example that I know of, aside from many other examples I do know of. But this one, in which he turned to my grandfather, looking up in this senior man who's now snarling, and my grandfather had a gravelly voice and could really intimidate. And when he's in your face and saying, what would you do now? Jackie looked at him and he said, Mr. Rickey, are you looking for an athlete who's afraid to fight back? What a genius of a question. The question is, what are you looking for? What kind of person are you looking for? Do you want somebody who's a coward? Go out and represent the Brooklyn Dodgers? No. And it gave my grandfather that moment that I think resonates through sports history. He said, Jackie, what I'm looking for is an athlete with the guts enough not to fight back. To not fight back. Because my grandfather thought that what this first player did was going to set an example. Set an example that many others were going to see as what might come of allowing this one hole in the dike. So, in that conversation, he's asked if he'd be willing to join the Brooklyn Dodgers. Not right off in the major leagues, but in AAA baseball. AAA baseball. The genesis of everything good. I think AA baseball's okay, and Class A baseball's all right. We all know it really starts at AAA. And he's been asked by this man in his face who he's never seen before if he's willing to turn the other cheek, to not strike back. Imagine what's going on. He was asked to let his performance on the field speak for him. There was no special clause in his contract. Imagine that. No clause in the contract. No penalty if he slipped. Nothing more than a handshake. A verbal agreement. Man to man. With someone he hadn't even known just hours earlier. Did I say Jackie Robinson, who died over 40 years ago, was my hero? He was. He was a childhood hero. Still a hero to me today. He showed me what it was to overcome adversity with character. His image for me is that Jackie who rebutted slurs with singles and doubles. His image for me is that player who returned being spiked by sliding players with more stolen bases himself. He didn't strike back, he excelled. Never cursed his adversaries, held his temper, and he dignified his purpose. He dignified the purpose of the Brooklyn Dodgers. But more than anything, he dignified the human being that he was. Now, over 50 years later, his star perhaps shines brighter as a symbol for us than it's ever shown. So many great athletes, athletes with statistics that so far surpassed anything Jackie was at. Jackie didn't get into the major leagues till he was 27, so he had an abbreviated career. Many athletes, subsequently and prior to him, built up books of records by comparison to Jackie. And many of those athletes, if we talk to youngsters today, we have to explain who they were. Jackie's got his own legacy that seems to shine brighter every year. We have to explain him so little. He's unblemished. really a true hero. Keeping with the 42, the movie gives some attention to Jackie's teammate, Pee Wee, the Dodgers shortstop. A quiet, young southern gentleman from Kentucky. He never asked to be part of the storm of shattering the color barrier. He was the Brooklyn Dodgers shortstop, and he wanted mainly just to play baseball. He watched quietly as opponents shouted vulgarities at his teammate. He listened to some of his own teammates who wondered aloud why they had to put up with all this. Then one game when the abuse was particularly pronounced, during the timeout, Pee Wee walked over from his shortstop position to Jackie across the infield, and he casually put his hand on Jackie's shoulder and just had a conversation with him as one teammate to another. Pee Wee was the captain of the team. And that one gesture, that one moment of humanity in 1947, coming from a player from Kentucky. Kentucky was considered in the Civil War a border state, known to have sympathies both southern and northern. And that one gesture, of course, shouted out to the whole league, shouted out to every fan that was in the ballpark, that the team captain, one who didn't shout much, didn't need to, but he understood the unfair treatment directed at his teammate. And he had to choose which side to stand on. That society, that side of society, which had come to him from growing up in Kentucky, where his friends didn't socialize with Negroes, or to choose to break with his entire family background. You know now if you saw the movie, and you know now because I've just told you. Especially, Pee Wee walked across the field and during the timeout chose to show his teammates and opponents that he preferred to befriend Jackie. A gesture the whole world now knows and is commemorated in a statue outside of a stadium, minor league stadium that's been constructed in Brooklyn to give testimony to that moment. And lastly, Branch Rickey, my namesake, or I always get that. Is he my namesake or am I his namesake? One way or the other. Melanie's my in-office expert on all the genealogy. Okay. She thinks it can go both ways, so. How unimaginable for me that he passed away over 45 years ago. Because I can picture him, so I can conjure him up so clearly. No grandson could ever have wanted for a more wonderful, infectious, inspiring grandfather. He changed the course of a few things that he touched during his career in baseball, but apart from his lifetime focus on signing talented athletes and developing winning teams, he learned years earlier and knew deeply and profoundly that the color barrier, as was called the gentleman's agreement in baseball, not to bring players of color into the game, didn't belong in American society, didn't belong in baseball. And that done right, this might inspire many to believe in a better direction than what had been our custom for decades and decades and centuries. He knew keenly, too, that he had to explain his motive for doing it. So he said clearly and simply that his motive was he wanted to make the Dodgers winners. When asked many years later about the credit he deserved for the greater achievement of helping to break the color barrier, he responded, it would shame a man to take credit for correcting a wrong that had been in place so long. And lastly, I'm inclined to share my grandfather's response to Lowell Thomas, the most prominent broadcaster of the era, given great credibility nationally for character himself. He stood for a lot of good things. And who from a leak in the Dodger front office learned of this going to happen, and he phoned my grandfather directly the night before the announcement of Robinson's signing to a Dodger contract. When he was called up in 1947, Lowell said to my grandfather, Branch, tomorrow all hell is going to break loose. My grandfather responded to him, "No, Lowell, I think tomorrow all heaven is going to rejoice." Of course, in the end, these anecdotes I've shared with you about Jackie and Pee Wee and Branch Rickey are intended to be less about them and more about you. They're simply my way of using examples of persons so known to me in my youth. They represent people who, like yourselves, have a special spark. And every one of you is a special spark. And each of those was a uniqueness. Just as in each of one of you, there's a unique hope to become yourself, a person who achieves something different, something above the ordinary. They left the sport of baseball a better sport, and maybe our society a little bit better society. I suspect that each of you also wants to have a positive impact on the lives of others and prove to others that you can and will reach something higher than what you perhaps might suspect many others think you can. It's your spark, your uniqueness, along with that abiding hope, a hope planted in you by your family, or maybe a faith gained at a young age. I've tried to suggest to you through these historical examples. Yes, this is all now merely historical, but because it embodies a rare quality that enables it to be a reminder that excellence of character is no more an accident than its good performance in your work, in your job. It's more achievable than in athletics because it doesn't require you to have any physical talent. I believe each of you have all the talent that you need to have excellence of character. You just have to stand for good things. Stand for what is fair. My grandfather's conviction on not swearing caused him to be seen as separate from most every other person in professional baseball in his era. I'm sorry to say, but that's a little bit of an admission maybe. Judas Priest was his most powerful epithet, if you call that an epithet. Let me tell you, he could clear a room with Judas Priest. A lot of people headed for the exits. He wouldn't cuss. Imagine somebody who spent his entire sports life around professional athletes, 50 years in the game, wouldn't cuss. And the press called him a do-gooder because of it. Tough-talking sports writers found him easy to lampoon. His non-drinking of alcohol, his non-drinking caused him to be put in another category. In fact, many people in baseball openly said, when I came into the game, and I think some of them still think it even today, never trust a man who doesn't drink. That was a common expression. Leo DeRocher said, I don't want any milkshake drinkers. When he was going to manage the club that year in 1947. I don't want any milkshake drinkers. So I often heard that repeated when I started in the game. His refusal to go into a ballpark on Sunday caused him to be released by the Cincinnati Reds as a player and later also be mocked as a Bible toter. A Bible toter. It was a derogatory phrase. You can imagine my grandfather didn't feel it was such a derogatory phrase, but in the open press, in the open public, that was in New York City and prior. Chance to try to discredit him, not as a legitimate sportsman, but as somebody who was out on some kind of mission. Even though it was a promise to his parents when he asked for their support for him leaving the farm to go and play a game and get paid for it. It was not based on his religious convictions at all. A verbal promise he kept after his parents had both passed away in the early 40s. He kept the promise simply because he had made it. and his refusal to measure a person by his or her skin color. I can remember him saying to me early when I was a pre-teenager, what is it that causes people to think that they can predict the potential of an individual based on his skin color? Caused him to have to risk a reputation he had spent 40 years building. His determination to follow through on a vow to himself to help correct a wrong, which set him against all the peers in his industry, the so-called leaders of the sport, who had voted collectively in a secret meeting for no club to be allowed to bring a Negro to the major league level, and caused him to face greater, often vicious ridicule from the media and letter threats, both to his office and to his home, potentially imperiling him and his family. His wife, my grandmother, spoke years afterwards of regularly tearing up, this is the kind of support he got in his marriage, of regularly tearing up the threat letters that came to the house. So at least he didn't have to face those at home. What I'm relating to you is, I don't believe you have to set out to be a hero, to change the world. All you have to do is live your life in the best way you can. And when you get the chance, go ahead and give somebody else a hand. Change their life for the better. I'm not talking about what the hero of the movie 42 did. The hero was obviously Jackie Robinson. He is a hero of gargantuan proportions, what he was able to accomplish, and the stress that brought to him and his family, his wife, and his children. But I'm telling you about the background role played by his partner and the decisions he made. Let me close by asking you, how different are the choices he made than decisions you'd be willing to make today? Remember, you don't have to be born in Texas to believe in great things. Thanks for having me here today.
That's a remarkable story, and we are so grateful that you took time to share it today. We have time for one or two real quick questions for Branch. George.
Only because I know the answer, I wanted to say it, because the movie wouldn't do it. You don't have to, but you don't feel like it's good job.
George is about to ask.
Why did your grandfather, what was the impetus for your grandfather making the choice to do this and going through with the property?
What was the reason my grandfather did this, and why did he go through with this? What was there in his background?
They referred to it throughout the movie, but they don't ever answer.
They referred to it. And you said I can answer this or not answer this. Okay, thank you. I'd rather not answer that. I will. I'll give you a real quick. George apparently thinks I can summarize this without driving all of you crazy because he's heard me tell it before. My grandfather was a college coach, and back at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century, which means this back in 1904. And his team went on the road. He had one Negro athlete on the club. And when they got to their visiting hotel, the hotel clerk, hotel manager, hotel clerk, refused to give lodging to their one dark-skinned athlete. And my grandfather, whose great skill later in life was going to be that of arguing successfully and cajoling, and he could convince so much, every one of our family, he could convince them to do something they didn't want to do just by persuasion. Got into this heated argument at the desk trying to win this thing, and finally won it so far as to allow his very talented, very wonderful athlete to wait for him in his room until they had solved this. And when he got up to his room later, He found this athlete, Charles Thomas, sitting on the end of the bed. And as my grandfather characterized it, my grandfather had been a catcher at the turn of the century, when catcher's gloves were not the one-handed, they didn't have the flex in them that they have today, so that you can catch a ball anywhere one-handed. You always had a very stiff, rounded mitt. You had to capture the ball after you'd caught it with a second hand, with what they call bare hand. Cause your hand to be in proximity to foul tips. If your hand's right close to where the ball, any deflection of the ball. So every knuckle on his right hand had been broken and stoved and ruined. And shaking hands with him was like grabbing a bag of marbles. And he had an unfortunate one finger that always pointed kind of the wrong way, and that caused me a problem in a speech he gave, but I won't get into that. And he replayed that. He showed Clarence Thomas sitting on the foot of the bed and tears running down his face, pulling at the skin on his fingers. And he said, "Mr. Rickey, if I could just change the color, if I could just rub this color off, I'm as good as any other man." And that was deeply embedded in my grandfather. He then went on to a lengthy career in St. Louis, where St. Louis was such a racially southern city at that time, that he found no chance to persuade ownership or to try and have that impact in St. Louis. But when, after World War II, he had a epiphany and realized he was going to need a job after he had gotten fired in St. Louis, or had a falling out with ownership. He went over to Brooklyn. Brooklyn truly was a melting pot. There were so many immigrants and so many people that had to go through adversity themselves. They understood what it was. Those were the people that, when Jackie was signed, embraced Jackie widely, wonderfully. Charles Thomas went on to be a successful dentist in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and as he went back and forth from east to west, would stop in St. Louis to visit my grandfather, and they would sit. My grandfather was a shameless micromanager who had to be at every pitch of every game, and wanted to see how things were being managed on the field. Yet when Charles Thomas came to town, the two of them sat in my grandfather's office because Negroes were not allowed in the grandstand. The only place they were allowed in St. Louis was in the bleachers, and my grandfather didn't want him sitting in the bleachers, so they would sit and visit in my grandfather's office. But it was a long time relationship, and my grandfather had a lot of admiration for Charles Thomas. Went on to be a successful professional and not a professional athlete.
Thank you again. Thanks so much, Branch.